Heads of state and global business leaders are meeting in the Brazilian Amazon for this year's COP30. But missing from the biggest climate event of the year are leaders from the world's biggest polluters: China, Russia, India, and the United States. So, how much progress can we really expect as global temperatures continue to rise? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the Brazilian city of Belém is on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, and it's the location for this year's climate conference, marking 3 decades of global negotiations. Despite this historic milestone, scientists warn current efforts to cut emissions aren't enough to prevent dangerous levels of warming. Another challenge is the US President Donald Trump, a climate denier who has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, embraced fossil fuels and ditched clean energy policies.
At the heart of the Amazon, a symbol of what's at stake and what could be lost to climate change, it is here in Belém, Brazil, that global leaders are gathering for COP30 UN climate talks. The heads of some of the world's leading CO2 emitters, the US, China, India and Russia, are missing, with delegations attending on their behalf. The US President Donald Trump has long rejected mainstream climate science and has withdrawn the US from the Paris Climate Agreement twice.
It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, this climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
The absence of Trump has not gone unnoticed by other world leaders, angering Colombian President Gustavo Petro.
Literally, Mr. Trump is against humanity. His absence here shows it.
2024 was the first calendar year to exceed the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 Celsius.
The hard truth is that we have failed to ensure we remain below 1.5 degrees. We need a paradigm shift to limit this overshoot's magnitude and duration and quickly drive it down.
The future King of England, Prince William, is attending the conference and urging leaders to act now for the next generation.
Let us build a future where nature is valued and where every child inherits a world of prosperity, not peril. Let us rise to this moment with the clarity that history demands of us.
Small nations like Barbados, Papua New Guinea and Suriname demand climate accountability, as they bear the brunt of the climate crisis despite emitting minimal emissions themselves. So can COP30 in the Amazon push the fight against climate change and turn global promises into action?
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining me in the studio, we have Ryder. Hannah is CEO at Development Reimagined. That's an international development consultancy focused on Africa and China. And I'm delighted to also welcome Jim Dale. Jim is a meteorologist and author of Surviving Extreme Weather. Also here with me in the studio, Andreza de Souza Santos. She is director at King's Brazil Institute. That's at King's College London. And Andreza will be attending COP30. And joining us remotely in London, we have Giorgia Monsignori. She is analyst at TPI Global Climate Transition Centre. That's at the London School of Economics and Political Science. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Anna, to you first of all, 4 of the most powerful people on earth, 4 of the biggest polluting countries, Russia, the United States, China and India, their leaders are not here this week. What does that tell us?
And it's not unusual, but also at the same time, we have to remember we can't bunch them up. The reasons why they're not going are very different. So we know that Trump and Putin, for example, they are not going because they want to focus on making their countries great again, and they don't believe necessarily that climate matters to that. And some of them even deny climate. China and India, certainly China in particular, is moving ahead on climate without the UN negotiations. They've decided that this is actually something that's in our economic interest and so on. So they don't need to go to a UN conference necessarily. The leader doesn't need to go to a UN conference necessarily in order for things to move in China. But at the same time, India, similarly, they've made their particular decision. The challenge is for the other countries is how do they push these countries to do more anyway? And that's the really hard part about the UN and when leaders don't attend UN conferences.
Jim, just come in on this then, your take on why these people aren't there. Does it matter?
I think I would completely agree with yourself in terms of saying two of them just don't get it, don't want to get it for their own self-serving reasons.
Which two? That's Trump and who else?
Trump and Putin. And I would say the other two, I think for the other two it's a little bit of a pity because I think they do understand. China is making, and India for the same reason, making huge steps in terms of renewables, etc. And it's surprising that they're not. Maybe they think they're too big for it in a way. You small people go and talk to amongst yourselves whilst we do what we want to do. That may be an element of that. It's a pity, but I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that those that are, the vast majority that are attending will do the right thing and will press those other countries to do the right thing. Why? Because we all know what the future will be if we don't get it right.
Andreza, you're originally from Brazil. I was struck by something your president said this week, that this is a COP in the Amazon as opposed to a COP about the Amazon. The location is very pertinent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. I think the message of bringing COP to Brazil and to a forested area in Brazil is exactly the message that we need to get all peoples involved, that we need to listen to all voices. And as the government of Brazil has said, is the COP of implementation, the COP that will try to act. And to act is about bringing everybody to the table. So this is a COP of participation.
And tell me, how much pride is there in Brazil that your country is hosting this and so many movers and shakers will be there?
I think it's very special. They even made Belém the capital of Brazil for the time of COP. And Brazilians are very proud to host this event and getting very involved with the discussions as well. So if we think about COP a few years ago, perhaps 10 years ago, it was very much a conversation of heads of states. Now we see more and more local governments, NGOs, academics, and of course now, especially in this COP, many indigenous peoples. So the conversation is becoming a lot more close to people.
Giorgia, to you, what do you think can be achieved in a few days in Brazil then this week?
Well, so I think what can be achieved in a few days is hard to say, but I would say that from previous COPs, we've always seen sort of ambition setting and forward-looking targets. And I really feel that at this COP this year, it should be about implementation and about, countries explaining how the targets that have been set are going to be met and, outlining as well those plans and what the financing needs are there. So it's really about detailing, where and how the targets will be set for this COP.
Back to you, Hannah. Just talk to me from the African perspective then about the money. What do you think African countries will be wanting from some of the far better equipped countries to deal with climate change financially, and indeed the countries who have caused climate change?
Right. Well, just to give a bit of context as well, African countries we've had 2 summits so far of African leaders focused on climate change, one in Nairobi in 2023 and just recently in Ethiopia, where there was very strong consensus around the ambition for African countries, especially in terms of renewable energy, but also adaptation as well. So the aim is, for example, to increase renewable energy on the African continent by 5 times over the next 5 years. Now, that's something China can achieve in 6 months. But on the continent, it has taken a lot longer, and it will take a lot longer, most likely because of the lack of finance. And this is exactly the point that African countries want to advocate for and are really pushing, because, even a report just came out recently saying that the amount of finance that countries are putting for, the rich countries are putting out for climate adaptation in particular, is 10 times less than what they actually need. It's just a tenth of what they need. And, this is, and at the same time, they're all putting out messages that we're going to be reducing aid, we're going to be reducing climate finance because we need to spend more on military. And this is just a terrible situation. The maths is really not mathsing. We really want the world to move. There has to be climate finance. There needs to be transfers of finance across countries.
Jim, just come in on that. That's a very interesting point, that all these countries, particularly in NATO, they're able to find percentages of budgets because President Trump has told them to spend 5% of their GDP on weapons. Mm-hmm. There doesn't seem to be any urgency about climate finance.
Which is so sad, because in the end, if this scenario is played out in terms of the direction of travel, already the UN Secretary has said, and we know it in our business, that 1.5 degrees above the industrial level has already been reached, and 2 degrees is the next step. That doesn't sound a lot. That sounds like a small, drop of water, and it's going to make no difference. And you know what? Education is a big part of this. Education and enthusing people who perhaps don't necessarily understand the full outcome of what could actually be happening, and particularly in the tropical world, Africa, etc. I use that word education a lot. It means a lot. If we can educate and enthuse the mass of people, then the few people who deny are going to be pushed into a small corner. They won't matter in the end. That's the point. So I think there's a big job to do, whether it be in Africa, in Britain, the same, and in other places, the education in terms of what climate is about, what climate change is about, and what we can do for health, safety and survival, because that's what it's coming to. Make that absolutely clear. We're now getting to the point where the temperature profile and the fallouts in terms of the extremes of weather are going to mean fatalities are going to continue to rise across the world, and that's why these messages have got to go out very clearly in terms of ensuring people know what to do when a wildfire, a flood, they know about climate change, what that actually means. All the barrel load has got to be unloaded out, but with enthusiasm, so it's grasped, and we can marginalise the deniers and the dissenters from this conversation.
Thanks, Jim. Andreza, how much of a problem is it then? Jim talks about the need for education of the general public, and you have arguably the most powerful man on earth, Donald Trump, who says there's no such thing. He calls it the biggest con in history. How difficult is that?
Well, that's an enormous challenge, because there is the tragedy of the commons here that we need to talk about. You have everybody benefits from forests, everybody benefits from the environment, everybody benefits if we stop climate change. But who wants to contribute to that? Who wants to pay the bill? And countries that are not contributing can benefit from the efforts of others. So it's extremely important, actually, to educate people so there is a shame in not contributing. There is a sort of social punishment in not contributing, because otherwise there is a tendency, and the natural effort is that people do not contribute so that they can benefit. They can be the free riders of the efforts that other countries are doing. And when a country such as the US passes on this message that they want to grow, they want to drill, and they are not contributing, they may push others into inaction as well. But the tipping point is already there, and it's all about survival. So we need to pass a message that frames, that shames, and that makes people into action and knowledge about what is actually at stake. That is not us against them, it's us for the life of everybody.
Giorgia, just come in on this. I mean, do you think we're at a point now where educationally the school curriculum should be including climate change as a standalone subject, perhaps away from being part of geography and science, that, educating young people about what is happening every single year to this planet?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the education on what's happening to our climate should extend far just from policymakers. I mean, here at the TPI Center, we focus our research on forward-looking data on the progress of corporates, but also sovereigns, and this is for an investor audience. So we can also say that, there's a growing interest among investors to really understand how countries and companies are progressing in the transition. And I think, on your point to the big hitters missing out on COP. I think this gives an opportunity to a lot of other countries to become climate leaders in the space. And I think we've seen that, Brazil is a relatively good climate leader with 90% of its electricity generation already from low carbon sources. And, even the UK is net zero target is quite aligned with the 1.5 goal that we've been talking about. So I think that although, there's countries maybe backtracking, at the same time, we're seeing a lot of countries in the world, stepping up to the plate.
Thank you. Hannah, to you. Talk to me about China then. You alluded to them having their own agenda and being very confident in what they're doing themselves.
Yep.
What are they doing?
Well, the major focus is on renewable energy and also in terms of electric vehicles, for example, where the innovation is. I mean, Chinese government absolutely sees the environmental agenda as a means to innovate, a means to kind of get to the higher value, the next level of manufacturing than it has been. And so as a result, it's sort of diversifying different energy sources and all that sort of thing, but also then saying, well, here we have some new products that we're going to market to the rest of the world, and it's going to, China will win from that.
Yeah,
and this is the challenge.
It's an economic. They see the economic goal.
Case. Absolutely,
they see it. There were some figures not many years ago, a couple of years ago, from Deloitte, the financial consultants, and they put out figures that said that if we don't go to net zero, the globe doesn't go to net zero, then it's going to cost the globe economically $171 trillion. If we do reach that in the same time period, it's going to be a benefit to the tune of $43 trillion. So you can see there is a real economic target, an economic reason beyond anything that we're talking about in terms of the actual negative outcomes of climate change, the catastrophes, etc. There's a real economic reason to push ahead. And I've just come from a seminar in Lloyd's of London, the centre of
money,
the city.
Finance, the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I said at that seminar, I said, look, guys, don't just sit there and go away from this. Go and lead. UK led with the Industrial Revolution. It's got every opportunity, has been said, that other countries, UK included, can pick up the flag, pick up the baton, run with it, and lead and make this happen beyond Trump, beyond anybody else. That's what China are doing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
That is the challenge. I mean, this message on the action, the cost of action being lower than the cost of inaction, that was something which I worked on the Stern Review back in 2006, and we made that case very, very clear. Yet, at the same time, there's just been so much complacency over so much time. And I think this is, again, the real challenge for the UN. How does the UN still push multilateralism? How does it still push that cooperation that you were talking about to deal with this tragedy of the commons? Yet, you do have countries that are either just not doing anything, others who are trying and highly ambitious, but don't have the money to do it. How does the UN find that? And I think that's the real challenge that we have today.
Thanks, Andrea. I want to bring Andreza in. Thanks, Hannah. Andreza, just talk to me about the situation then in South America. Apart from Brazil, which countries are leading on climate and making this a priority?
I think Brazil is, for many years now, being a regional leader, and especially on climate. Obviously, during Bolsonaro's administration, that leadership was challenged and no longer there, but we didn't have a country that took up that space. So I think Brazil is definitely a leader on this, and leading also by example. We could mention Costa Rica, which is becoming definitely a green power.
Thank you. Giorgia, give us your view of the European situation and which countries are actually providing leadership on this and not burying their heads in the sand.
Yeah, so I think that from our research on our sovereigns and at the center, it's a bit of a nuanced picture. It's hard to say exactly who is completely leading in the space. I think it depends as well on the areas. So I think in terms of, electricity generation, there's Denmark and Finland who are almost at 100% electricity generation from low carbon sources. We've also seen some countries really commit to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. So that's the contribution of finance towards the fossil fuel industry. And these would be, Portugal, Italy, Germany, and really ambitious policies such as banning oil and gas. We've also seen that in Ireland and Portugal. So I think it's a bit nuanced to say, which ones are really lagging behind. I think as well, thematic to this COP on matters of just transition, Spain really does well in this area, and they have mandated, just transition strategies on how to enhance dialogue with different stakeholders and really bring them on with the country in their transition.
Thank you, Giorgia. Hannah, to you, just talk to me then about the fossil fuel industry. This is still a very powerful voice.
Very, very. And even within the UN negotiations, you will find that sometimes the fossil fuel industry will even sponsor delegates to go into the negotiation. They will themselves obviously have passes in there and brief delegates to, agree to positions and push positions which are against acting on climate.
You've seen this firsthand?
I have seen it firsthand, absolutely.
So are they paying people? Let this get straight. They're paying people.
They will sponsor delegates from governments to have larger delegations, and they will be sponsored by the fossil fuel industry. Yes.
I'll give you an analogy that's in recent years, the tobacco industry, exactly the same tactics, putting people in white coats, saying you don't get cancer from tobacco. We saw what happened with that. Time after time after time, they would deny it until the point they couldn't. And exactly the same thing is going to happen with climate change, with what happens with the catastrophes around the world that will multiply. At a certain point, they're going to be turning around and saying, well, actually, we can't hold this anymore. We can't hold this argument. So they'll turn around to a different argument, which is not net zero. We don't like that one. And it's happening in the UK to a certain degree.
Some politicians hate it.
Yeah, exactly that. We know Reform UK in the UK, even the Conservative Party, although they admit that climate change is a thing and it needs to be stopped. The point is that by saying not net zero, well, what's left? What is left? An empty can. That's what's left. And so people have got to get wise to what's going on here. Look at the template of the tobacco industry. What happened there in the 70s and 80s, the same is happening here.
Hannah, would you have suspicions then that scientists are being paid by the fossil fuel industry to come up with research that says that this is not happening?
I think there's a real risk of that happening at the moment, and especially because you've got stronger backing from the US government on a position around climate denial. I don't know that that's happening necessarily, but I think there is absolutely. I think Jim would have much more to say about the scientific community. But at the same time, I think that's also what, there has been a very strong consensus on climate action, very strong, through very clear processes, IPCC process. The UN, again, needs to do something about it and to keep finding ways to deal with it.
Yeah, Jim, just elaborate on that then, scientists possibly getting paid by the fossil fuel industry.
It will be a very small contingent, maybe only 1 or 2%, maybe people in the past that have been on TV or something, and they will be paid to muddy the waters, let's put it that way. They won't necessarily come out and say it doesn't exist, but they will muddy the waters sufficiently to convince those that perhaps are maybe less educated to follow what is prescribed by the vast majority of scientists as being obvious.
Andreza, your thoughts on that issue?
I don't know if it's a good investment to put money on scientists because we are not the ones doing the policy. So it's not necessarily that scientists have to say that will change the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are.
Andreza, your country, Brazil, hosting COP, and one of the high-profile visitors this week is Prince William from the British royal family. How important is it to have big, famous, internationally known voices speaking out on climate?
Well, it is extremely important because the conversation on climate sometimes goes like the end of the world versus the end of the month. But we still need to eat every day. We need to develop. We need to get jobs. We need this and that. And then we communicate that it's actually about this glass being cheaper than the water that we put inside. Like if we don't act to climate that matters also for the economy, that matter also for everyday families, that matter also for everybody on the game. So these voices, they're heard. People are looking into this. It is all over social media. So you bring this conversation to everyday people's lives, influencers and so on, music, theater, TV presenters and everybody. So I think it's a huge message and contribution.
Final point to you, Hannah. What would you like to see be achieved this week, if anything, for all this talking?
Well, I would like to see that the recognition that we do still need to be pushing really hard on climate action. There are significant discussions around the kinds of targets that countries will have, which was referred to earlier. Just a continued push on that. And even though we won't have those top leaders being in Belém, at least the commitment from the other countries to do more. This is all we can really ask for.
Thank you, Hannah, Jim, Andreza and Giorgia Monsignori as well. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.